Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into something truly fascinating. We are going to unpack the actual day-to-day mechanics of faith. Specifically, we'll be looking at how ancient theological frameworks are meticulously designed from the ground up to build just absolutely extraordinary human and emotional resilience. I want you to think about this for a moment. What exactly allows the human heart to not just survive a literal tsunami of grief, but to somehow actually show gratitude in the aftermath? It sounds impossible, right? Well, to find the answer, the source material points us toward a very close look at the daily mechanics of Islamic faith. So let's start with Section 1, the 5 pillars and basic Islamic practice. According to research from CRST, there are these foundational, unifying duties known as Arkan al-Islam, and these are what guide the religious lives and the core identity of Muslims all over the globe. You can see this shared practice vividly at the Kaaba in Mecca, which literally unites millions of people, cutting straight across any ethnic, regional, or sectarian differences they might have. It all boils down to these 5 core duties. We've got the Shahada, which is the declaration of faith, Salah, the daily prayer, Zakat, or almsgiving, Psalm, which is fasting, and finally Hajj, the pilgrimage. Now, our sources point out a really interesting historical fact here. These practices, which actually have roots in pre-Islamic Arabia, were systematized with a strictly monotheistic focus way back in the early 11th century by a theologian named Abu Muslim Abdul Qahir al-Baghdadi.
Moving on to Section 2, the declaration and the prayer. These are the absolute foundations of the faith. Take a look at the Shahada, beautifully inscribed here. This is the fundamental bedrock statement of Islamic faith. It asserts 2 main non-negotiable ideas: the absolute oneness of God and the role of Muhammad as his messenger. It is so central, in fact, that simply reciting this brief statement 3 times in front of witnesses is the primary requirement for someone converting to the faith. That's the whole starting point.
And right after that comes Salah, the ritual prayer. Sunni Muslims perform this up to 5 times every single day. If you look at the physical mechanics of it, the specific bowing, the prostration, there is a very deliberate rhythm to it all. It involves ritual washing beforehand, designated times that shift with the sun throughout the day, and, as you'll often note, men and women praying in separate congregations.
Which brings us to Section 3, nourishing the human soul and cleansing the heart.
You might be wondering why such an incredibly strict daily framework. Well, our source material uses this vivid metaphor that I think just hits the nail on the head. Think about physical dirt for a second. You take a daily shower because you know your body naturally gathers dirt, right? It's unavoidable. Well, the texts argue that our hearts do the exact same thing. They naturally gather spiritual dirt through normal, everyday human error and sin. So just as your body needs a shower, the heart absolutely requires regular daily cleansing through repentance and prayer. The truly crucial takeaway here is that khutbah texts, which are basically Islamic Friday sermon materials, do not frame these daily practices as just a bunch of legalistic obligations. Not at all. They frame them as vital nourishment. They literally describe Salah and the recitation of the Quran as the oxygen of the heart. The idea is that without this structured daily intake, the human soul spiritually suffocates. Let's look at Section 4, the trial of gratitude, and what happens when this faith is truly tested.
Because it's one thing to talk about theology, but let's see what happens when this framework is put to the absolute most brutal test imaginable. The sources detail a gripping, real-world account of a mother who received just unimaginable news. 3 of her young daughters were diagnosed with MPS. If you don't know, this is a rare, currently incurable genetic disorder where a perfectly healthy child slowly loses all their bodily faculties, eventually losing even the ability to swallow their own saliva. And as if that wasn't enough, her son was simultaneously diagnosed with severe autism. Her home literally had to become a 24-hour hospital ward.
Any normal person would expect complete, total despair, but incredibly, her response was this: "I'm drowning in gratitude." Think about that. Despite watching her children's health deteriorate day by day and eventually losing 2 of her daughters, she constantly looks at people around the world who she feels have less than her. She just refuses to be broken by it. And the source material presents this as the ultimate example of a heart fortified by that daily spiritual oxygen we talked about. It really brilliantly illustrates the contrast in how we process profound grief. When the father first heard the devastating diagnosis, he looked at his girls and understandably said, "I feel like I'm looking at 3 graves."
But the mother incredibly reframed this entire tragic trial. She replied, "No, there are 3 doors to Jannah," referring to paradise. It's a staggering demonstration of how a rigorously nourished faith can withstand a literal tsunami of grief.
This leads us to Section 5, forgiving the unimaginable, the ultimate test of the human heart. The sources recount another devastating, very real story. This is about Dr. Jitmud, who is a former Islamic school principal. He was already grieving, having recently lost his wife to cancer, and then he receives that dreaded phone call at 3 in the morning. His 21-year-old son, who was just out working a normal shift delivering pizzas, had been brutally murdered.
If we walk through the timeline of his grief, it's astonishing. First, obviously, there was the profound shock. But then came step 2. He spent 2 full years relentlessly pushing his lawyers. And it wasn't for vengeance. He pushed for 2 years just to get a face-to-face meeting with his son's killer in maximum security. And finally, step 3. The trial happens, and he actually physically embraces his son's killer right there in the courtroom.
The reasoning behind this is captured so perfectly in his breathtaking courtroom statement. He told the judge, "I want to meet with him because I want to forgive him and I want him to be in the same place with my son." He literally hugged and forgave the murderer on behalf of himself and his late wife. The sources emphasize this so clearly. This is not some ancient parable from a textbook. This is modern reality. This is a person living today operating with a deeply spiritually conditioned heart.
Finally, Section 6, the power of a heart and spiritual resilience.
To bring this all together for you, a healthy heart, in this context, is so much more than just a physical organ pumping blood in your chest. It is a carefully, intentionally maintained vessel. The structured daily repetition of those 5 pillars we discussed, that constant oxygen of prayer and repentance, is purposefully designed to build this exact type of emotional and spiritual strength. It conditions a heart that is actually capable of absorbing impossible pain and somehow responding with unimaginable grace.
So I want to leave you with this lingering, provocative thought, which is heavily inspired by the khutbah texts, and I want you to really mull this over. What priorities are shaping your life right now? And more importantly, what are you using to daily nourish your own heart for the storms that inevitably lie ahead? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope exploring this source material together has given you a powerful new perspective on the true mechanics of human resilience.